Hey, say hello to Hillary Cooper. Hillary joins us today. She's a employee of Speech Language Consulting Services in Leesville, and her boss Robbie put her up to this today, right?
She sure did.
How you doing? Nice to meet you.
I'm doing great. How are you?
Hey, okay. Now you are a certified licensed speech language pathologist. So this is Better Hearing and Speech Month. So we thought we'd talk a little about what you do and how you work with children in our school system.
Absolutely. Well, I'll start off telling you a little bit about Better Speech and Hearing Month. It was established in 1927 as a way to really put the word out there for the community that more people than you think have speech language disorders and hearing problems. And the current statistics, they say that about 14 million Americans have some sort of either language or speech problem. That's roughly equivalent to 3 times the population of the entire state of Louisiana.
And that could be anything from a stutter to a lisp or inability to pronounce consonants and such.
Absolutely.
And don't hearing deficiencies and speech problems go hand in hand?
Often they do. Not all the time, but most of the time they do, especially in young children. If they have chronic ear infections and they can't hear, then they're not going to pick up the sounds to be able to learn speech and to pick up new words. So.
And if their parents don't talk to them.
Absolutely. We encourage that.
I know that sounds far-fetched, but, you know, there are some parents that just let kids be.
Well, there's an interesting statistic, I need speech apparently. One of the things that I tell all my clients' parents is that a typically developing child needs about 10,000 words a day, which seems like a lot, but really it's not that much. You just have to talk to your child and label everything. When you're at the grocery store, talk about what you're doing and what you're putting in the basket, and that goes a very, very long way as far as promoting good language development.
I mean, the obvious question, how would you know if your child needs speech therapy? If they don't pronounce words properly, if they have a lazy mouth.
Well, we don't like to call it a lazy mouth. That's not necessarily the terminology I would use. But, you know, some children are just slower to develop the muscle movements of the mouth that help with speech. And, you know, like we were saying earlier, if you have chronic ear infections.
So you're like a personal trainer for your face.
Pretty much, yeah. We do lots of exercises, and I like to call them oral gymnastics. So, we do lots of exercises with the tongue and the lips and all of that to help facilitate speech. But we also do a lot of just language stimulation. So we'll, sit there, and what appears to the child is we're playing with them, but we're actually targeting specific goals, really looking at getting them to communicate more effectively.
And what would be the youngest that you have had the opportunity to work with?
Oh my goodness. I think right now on my caseload I have an 18-month-old. That's about the youngest. And I have through the entire lifespan, I believe my oldest client is about 65 or so.
Wow.
So in everything in between, I see a lot of toddlers, young kiddos, preteens, teenagers. We actually have quite a few active duty soldiers who've come back from Afghanistan with traumatic brain injuries that we see for cognitive therapy. I deal with adults who've had strokes or have various swallowing problems or voice problems.
Yeah, that often occurs with a stroke. Not only the physical problems, but the mental problems and the ability to form vowels and consonant sounds with a stroke.
Absolutely.
That can be a problem. I have a friend that has suffered through a stroke, and you can tell that he's got problem making certain noises and sounds. So, what is your typical day like when you come in?
Well, we get to work early. We have lots of caffeine because it's a very high-energy profession. So if you ever look in our refrigerator, you'll see lots of Monsters and coffee and various sorts of caffeine.
In all the years I've been in radio, people said, "You don't drink coffee?" I said, "No, but nothing like a Coke at 4 in the morning to get you there."
Absolutely.
You know?
Well, my philosophy is I give every one of my patients 100%. So after you've dealt with, clients from 8 in the morning until 6 o'clock in the evening, you need that extra little boost. But a typical day, we come in, we do have short sessions. We do 30-minute sessions with our clients. And that's because after about 30 minutes, you're just either done mentally or you're exhausted because it is intensive work. Younger kids just don't have the attention span for it. But we see them. We start rolling at 8 o'clock in the morning. We take a little break for lunch, and we keep rolling through the afternoon, and that's our day.
I've got a question here. What is one of your success stories?
I actually have a really funny story. I had an older lady who came in after having a stroke, and she couldn't swallow, and she had a feeding tube for about 7 months.
Oh, jeez.
And so she was really, really motivated to get rid of the feeding tube and to be able to eat normally again.
Yeah.
And so we did really intensive therapy, and she was a champion. What we do is we make recommendations, and we kind of guide the process and fine-tune it as she goes. But she took everything and just ran with it. And with the time when she finally passed the test that showed that she could eat safely and have the tube removed, I got to be the one to break that news to them. So I got to call her husband and say she gets to eat. And you could hear in the background, he's like, can she have a beer? And I said, well, of course she can have a beer. And in the time it took for him to say back to me, are you sure she can have a beer? She had gone to the refrigerator and come back and was holding it for him to open. And I was like, give that woman a beer. She needs a beer. So the first thing after 7 months she had was that beer that she very well deserved.
In our school system, how if a child is deemed by an instructor in a public school to have a speech problem, they can refer that child to you. What's the process in our school system for trying, in other words, if the parents haven't identified their problem before school starts, and a teacher along the way says, it's a really sweet child, but we can fix this. How do they make that hookup with y'all?
Well, we do have speech pathologists in the schools. So every school in Vernon, Burgard, all the areas are required to have speech pathologists on staff.
All right.
The requirements for that, so if the teacher had a concern, they could ask the parents or just have the process started to where the child could be evaluated by the school speech pathologist. Because of the heavy caseload that the school therapists have, sometimes they can't take kids who need the services but aren't severe enough to qualify for their guidelines. So in that case, if the parents still feel like they need services, that's when they can get referred to a private practice like us, where we would take them when the schools wouldn't necessarily, or we could provide more services, or even services at the same time, so you can double up the amount of services that the child is receiving.
So how important then is early identification in going to fix this in the long term?
Oh, it's absolutely imperative. They've done lots of studies showing that the earlier you catch speech language problems, the earlier you identify autism, hearing issues like chronic ear infections, the much better results you're going to have with therapy, and the sooner your child will normalize, typically.
Yeah. And I'm going to throw out a hypothetical situation. Let's say that a senior has passed a milestone birthday like 70th, 75th, and they start to develop hearing problems. Have you ever heard of a case where a person began to develop speech problems with that loss of hearing? Would that be kind of be like the bass-ackward way of going at it? But
it can happen. Typically what you'll notice with an adult, especially an older adult who's losing their hearing, is that they'll start yelling everything.
Yeah.
And they'll be like, what? What'd you say? What? And they'll ask you to repeat everything, and they'll get mad at you because you're mumbling. But typically, if you have fully intact speech, you won't necessarily see that decline unless there's something else going on.
And hearing aids today, I mean, my gosh, some hearing aids are no bigger than a pencil eraser.
Absolutely. They have wonderful technology, and they have them so that you can't even see them when you're wearing them. So they're practically invisible.
So when you went off to college, what drew you to this field?
Well, it's a funny story. I started out as a pharmacy major, and I went through the whole program and was about to go to pharmacy school, and I did some observations. I went to a few pharmacies and watched them, and within a half hour at each one, I wanted to stab my eyeballs out. There are people who are wonderful pharmacists who do a great job, and I applaud them for that, but it was not for me. And so I basically sort of dug deep into my personality and what would I like to do. And so I'm a really hands-on person. I like to problem solve, and each patient who comes in is completely different.
Sure.
There's a saying that goes, if you've seen one autistic child, you've seen one autistic child. And that's kind of how I view all my patients. Each one comes in, there's no two that are alike. One thing that motivates one will not motivate the next. So I love that changing factor in the problem solving, and that's why I like it.
How do you approach someone whose child seems to have problems? It's really none of your business. You think they may be autistic or have a speech delay, but you're worried about the child. How do you approach that with the parent? Because parents love their children, and hopefully they want the best for their children.
Mm-hmm. It's a really tricky situation, especially with other people's children. You don't want to sit there and say, oh, well, I think your kid has a problem, because then that's going to put other parents on the defensive. A really good way to do it is to say, you know what? I'm having my kid evaluated for speech problems. Have you thought about doing that? Make it more like you're sharing part of the, it's not as much of a stigma to have it done. Say, look, I'm doing this too. So that kind of brings them to you so that they're more comfortable with wanting to, say, oh, well, maybe my child does need something. Those teachers have said something about it. Maybe I should go ahead and get an evaluation. But really trying to reduce the stigma is a good way to break that.
All right, so bottom line, during Better Hearing and Speech Month, talk to your child, feed your child words, and don't make them Google Gaga baby words.
Absolutely not.
Oh, she's so cute today. I just wanted this. Don't
Real words
talk
are
to
important.
your child like an adult.
Absolutely.
And they'll learn words, and they'll learn good words, and they'll learn the proper way to say words. And we live in the South, and there are people that have drawls, and they say words differently. If you are a native of Anacoco, you say Anacoca. If you're not a native, you say Anacoco, because that's the way it's spelled. If you're a native of Pitkin, you probably don't say the T, you say Pitkin.
Yeah.
Colloquialisms. So they're around us a lot, but bear that in mind when talking with your child.
Absolutely. And we always say that a dialect does not make a disorder. So just because someone uses a different type of accent, as long as they're communicating effectively, that's wonderful.
All right, Hillary. Well, thanks for coming in today. It was a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you. It was nice being here.
And Hillary Cooper is a certified licensed speech language pathologist. She works at the Speech Language Consulting Services in Leesville, and she works with Robbie Whitaker. And for that, Hillary will probably go straight to heaven when she dies.
And also, you guys can check us out. We do have a website, www.speechlanguageconsulting.com. We've got a lot of really good information on that website for you.
Well, thanks for taking time from your busy schedule to visit with us today.
Thank you so much.
You bet. Our guest on the diner today, Ms. Hillary Cooper.